The village of traditions. In the heart of the Kari village, life was as predictable as the sunrise. The village sat between rolling hills and vast fields, where children grew up knowing their place long before they reached adulthood. Boys learned to fish, farm, or carve wood, while girls were taught to cook, weave, and care for their families. It had been this way for generations, a rhythm as steady as the river that nourished their land. No one questioned it. No one dared to dream beyond the village borders, except for one girl. Nayla was not like the other girls. She was born with the same dark, glistening skin, the same hopeful eyes, but her heart beat to a different rhythm. She had always been curious, always asking questions no one wanted to answer. Why do we not go beyond the hills, she would ask. Why do the boys get to learn more than us? The elders only chuckled, shaking their heads. You ask too much, Nayla. A girl's duty is in the home. What more could you possibly need? But Nayla wanted more. She longed for knowledge, for books filled with stories of the world beyond Kari. The only people who spoke of distant lands were the traders who came through once a season, carrying spices, fabrics, and strange tales. She would sit by their feet, listening to stories of cities where buildings touched the sky, where people read from pages and spoke of numbers so great they could not be counted on fingers. It was on one such evening, as the fire crackled and the traders spoke, that she first heard the word university. In the city of Lyoba, a merchant with silver-streaked hair said, girls and boys alike can go to school. They learn numbers, they learn words. They become doctors, teachers, and even leaders. Nayla's heart pounded. A place where a girl like her could learn. Could become someone. She rushed home, bursting into her family's hut, her breath short with excitement. Father, she pleaded, there is a place where girls can learn. In Lyoba, they teach everything. I want to go there. Her father, Elder Omari, frowned deeply. He had always been a firm but fair man, respected in the village for his wisdom. Nayla, he said, our way of life has served us well. You will marry, have children, and teach them what your mother has taught you. That is the way. But why? Nayla insisted, her voice trembling. Why can't I be more? Omari sighed, rubbing his temple. His daughter had always been stubborn, always pushing where others accepted. It is not our way, he said. A woman's strength is in her home. What use is learning numbers when a pot must be filled with food? Her mother, Gina, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. My child, we only want what is best for you. The city is not our world. You do not know the dangers that lie there. But Nayla knew, in the depths of her heart, that she had to go. If she stayed, her life would be planned out before her like the narrow paths of the village. Marriage, children, and endless days spent in the kitchen. But if she left, if she took the chance, she could break free. For weeks, she begged. She pleaded with her father, argued with her mother, even sought counsel from the village elders. If you let me go, she reasoned, I can return with knowledge. I can teach others. I can help Kari grow. The elders murmured among themselves, weighing the boldness of her words. No girl from Kari had ever left for the city, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for change. Elder Omari, caught between tradition and the spark of something new, finally relented. You may go, he said. But remember, Nayla, you carry not just your own future, but the pride of this village. Do not bring shame upon us. Nayla felt the world shift beneath her feet. She had won. The village gathered to see her off. Women packed food for her journey, dried fish, ground maize, and a flask of palm oil. The men, reluctant but hopeful, offered what little coins they could spare. The younger girls watched with awe, whispering among themselves, could we do this too, one day? Before she left, her mother pulled her close. The city can be cruel, she whispered. Hold on to your heart, my daughter. Do not lose yourself in its ways. With her small bundle of belongings and the weight of her people's expectations, Nayla set off toward the unknown. The journey to Luyoba was long, the dusty roads stretching endlessly before her. But she walked with purpose, her mind filled with the dreams of knowledge, of books and learning, of a life beyond the narrow walls of tradition. Little did she know that the road she had chosen was filled with twists and trials that would test not just her mind, but the very essence of who she was. As the village faded behind her, Nayla whispered a silent promise, I will make you proud. The first taste of the city. The road to Luyoba stretched endlessly before Nayla, the sun high and unrelenting. Her legs ached from walking, her throat dry from the dust that clung to the air. But with each step, she felt the weight of her village's expectations pushing her forward. She had left behind the familiar, the comforting home of life in Kerry, and was now walking towards something she had only heard of in stories. As she neared the city, the landscape changed. The fields gave way to buildings, small ones at first, made of clay and wood, then larger ones of stone, and finally, great towering structures that seemed to reach for the sky itself. Nayla had never seen anything like it. The roads were no longer simple dirt paths but paved in stone, with people rushing past her, their clothes finer than anything she had ever worn. She gripped her small bundle of belongings tightly, her heart pounding. She had arrived. Luyoba was alive in a way Kerry never was. The streets were filled with merchants calling out their wares, children weaving through the crowds, and carts rolling past, pulled by animals she had never seen before. Everywhere, there was noise, laughter, shouting, music drifting from open windows. It was overwhelming. She was still taking in the sights when someone called her name. Nayla. She turned and saw a young woman, about her age, dressed in a brightly colored city dress. Her hair was styled differently, her skin glowing with oils Nayla had never used. She smiled. You must be Nayla from Kerry. My father told me you were coming. I'm Omori. Nayla felt relief wash over her. Omori was the daughter of the wealthy merchant who had come to Kerry and spoken of education. He had arranged for Nayla to stay with his family while she studied. Omori led Nayla through the city, explaining things as they walked. That's the main market, she said, pointing to a crowded square. You can find anything there, food, clothes, even books. And that, she gestured toward a grand building, is the university. That's where you'll be learning. Nayla's breath caught. It was larger than anything she had imagined, with wide stone steps leading up to great wooden doors. She could hear the murmur of voices inside, see students walking in and out, their arms filled with books. For the first time, she truly believed it. She was going to school. That night, as she lay on a soft mattress in Omori's home, she thought of her village, of the girls who had watched her live with hope in their eyes. I will not fail, she promised. The next morning, her lessons began. The cost of being different. School was nothing like Kerry. The classrooms were large, filled with wooden benches and blackboards covered in strange markings. The teachers spoke quickly, expecting their students to keep up. Nayla had always been sharp, always quick to learn, but here, she felt small. The other students seemed to know so much already, and she had to work twice as hard just to keep up. She spent hours reading, practicing, memorizing. Slowly, she began to understand. Her teachers noticed her effort and praised her. Some students admired her dedication, but others, they only saw how different she was. It started with whispers. Look at her dress. So plain. She speaks like she's never been in a city before. Village girl. The word stung. She had never cared about her clothes before, had never thought that the way she spoke could mark her as different. But here, among students dressed in fine silks and adorned with jewelry, her simple cotton dress and bare feet made her stand out. Omari noticed the way Nayla shrank when the whispers grew loud. One day, she pulled her aside. "Nayla, you can't keep dressing like this. People will always see you as an outsider." "But this is who I am," Nayla said, frowning. "I know," Omari sighed. "But in the city, appearances matter. If you want to be taken seriously, you need to look like you belong." Nayla hesitated. She had left Carrie to learn, not to change who she was. But if no one respected her, if they always saw her as the village girl, how could she prove herself? That night, she sat in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. For the first time, she wondered, was she still Nayla of Carrie? Or was she becoming someone else? Hunger and hardship. As months passed, Nayla's studies became harder, but so did something else, survival. The money her village had sent was small, barely enough to buy food. Some nights, she went to bed hungry, her stomach twisting in pain. She tried to make it last, skipping meals, rationing what little she had. But hunger made everything harder. It dulled her mind, made her body weak. She found herself struggling to focus in class, her thoughts drifting to food when she should have been paying attention. One evening, she sat alone in her small room, her hands trembling as she counted the last few coins she had. This will not last. Omari, always noticing, found her the next day. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. "Are you eating?" Nayla forced a smile. "I manage." Omari frowned. "Come with me." She led Nayla through the city, past streets Nayla had never dared walk before. Finally, they stopped in front of a place filled with music and laughter. Inside, women dressed in shimmering fabrics moved gracefully, talking to men who handed them money in exchange for their company. "What is this place?" Nayla asked, her stomach twisting. "A way to survive," Omari said. "Some of these women are students, just like us. They come here at night, entertain wealthy men, and live with full pockets." Nayla's heart pounded. She understood what Omari was saying. This was how city girls lived when they had no other choice. She shook her head. "I can't." Omari sighed. "Then find another way, Nayla. Because hunger will not wait for you to decide." That night, Nayla lay awake, her stomach aching, her mind filled with questions. What was more important? Her pride? Or her survival? She had come to Luyoba to learn, to change her life. But now she wondered if the city would change her first. The path ahead was no longer clear. And for the first time since she left Carrie, Nayla felt truly lost. The temptation of easy wealth. Nayla lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her small room, listening to the distant hum of the city outside. The hunger in her stomach was a dull, familiar ache, but tonight, it felt heavier, like a burden that would not let her rest. She had always known this journey would be difficult, but she had not expected to feel so alone, so weak. In Carrie, she had been surrounded by love, by people who cared for her, even if they did not understand her dreams. But here in Luyoba, the city moved too fast, and no one slowed down to notice a girl struggling to survive. The next morning, she forced herself out of bed, dragging her weary body to class. She sat in the lecture hall, gripping her pen tightly, but the words on the board blurred in front of her eyes. She tried to focus, tried to push through the dizziness, but hunger made her weak, and weakness made her invisible. She barely noticed when the lesson ended, barely heard the chatter of students as they left. But Omari noticed. "You didn't hear a word of that lecture, did you?" she asked, crossing her arms. Nayla sighed, rubbing her temples. I'm fine." "No, you're not," Omari said, her voice firm but not unkind. You're starving. And if you don't do something about it, you fail. Nayla looked away. The thought of failure terrified her more than anything. She had come to the city to prove that a village girl could learn, could rise above expectations. But now, she was sleeping, and she had no one to catch her. Omari lowered her voice. I know a way you can make money. Fast. Nayla's stomach twisted. She already knew what Omari was going to say. That place you showed me, Nayla whispered. That bar, that's how you make money, isn't it? Omari hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yes. Nayla felt her breath catch. It's not what you think, Omari continued quickly. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. Just talk to them, laugh at their jokes, let them buy you drinks. Some men will pay just to have company. Nayla's heart pounded. And if they want more than company? Then you say no, Omari said simply. But if you say yes, the money is even better. Nayla clenched her fist. She had promised her family, her village, that she would make them proud. She had left Kerry with the hope of becoming someone they could look up to, not someone who sold her time, her dignity, to strangers. But then, the sharp pain of hunger twisted inside her, reminding her of reality. Pride did not fill an empty stomach. She looked at Omari, at the fine clothes she wore, at the way she never seemed to struggle the way Nayla did. Just once, Nayla whispered, barely believing the words had come from her own lips. Omari smiled. Just once. A night of choices. That evening, Nayla stood in front of a mirror, wearing a dress Omari had given her. It was nothing like the simple fabrics of Kerry, it shimmered under the dim candlelight, clinging to her body in ways that made her feel exposed. Her reflection did not look like her. You look beautiful, Omari said, fastening a necklace around Nayla's neck. Just relax. Let them think you belong here. Nayla took a deep breath, her heart hammering. She didn't belong here. She wasn't like the other girls who laughed so easily, who walked with confidence. But tonight, she had to pretend. When they arrived at the bar, Nayla was overwhelmed by the lights, the music, the scent of perfume and expensive drinks. Men sat in groups, laughing loudly, their eyes sweeping over the room, searching. Omari guided her forward, introducing her to a man named Bale. He was older, well-dressed, and when he smiled, there was something calculating in his eyes. You're new, he observed, sipping his drink. Nayla forced a smile. I am. He laughed, motioning for her to sit. Tell me about yourself. She told him what she thought he wanted to hear, small lies that made her sound mysterious, interesting. She laughed when he joked, even when she didn't find it funny. She let him buy her drinks, let him lean closer, let him rest his hand lightly on her arm. At the end of the night, he handed her a small bundle of money. More than she had ever held in her hands before. This is just for the pleasure of your company, he murmured. Next time, maybe we can talk about more. Nayla swallowed hard, nodding. She took the money, ignoring the shame curling in her stomach. She had done nothing wrong. But then why did she feel like she had? The slow descent. That one night turned into another. And another. At first, Nayla told herself it was harmless. She never crossed the lines she had drawn for herself. She only talked, only laughed, only let them admire her. And the money kept coming. She no longer went to bed hungry. She bought food, books, even a new dress for school. The whispers of village girl quieted as she blended into city life. But blending in came at a price. The more she returned to the bar, the more difficult it became to say no. Some men expected more, and though she resisted at first, the money they offered was hard to refuse. She tried not to think about Kerry, about the village that had sent her here with hope in their hearts. She told herself she was surviving. But deep inside, she knew she was losing herself. The letter from home. One afternoon, as Nayla was leaving school, a boy ran up to her, breathless. "A letter," he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. "From your village." Her heart pounded as she took it, her hands shaking as she unfolded the warm parchment. "Nayla, my daughter. Your father is ill. The elders say it is his time, but I know he is waiting for you. If you can, come home. He asks for you every day. Please, my child. Come home before it is too late." Tears blurred her vision. Her father. The man who had given her permission to leave, who had trusted her with the pride of their family. He was waiting for her. And what would he see when she returned? A girl who had left full of dreams and returned with money earned from men who whispered sweet lies in her ear. Nayla's stomach twisted. She had spent so long trying to survive that she had forgotten why she had come here in the first place. She had wanted to learn. To prove that she was more than what the village had expected. Instead, she had lost herself in a city that never cared for her. Her father was dying. And she could not let him leave this world without seeing him one last time. Taking a deep breath, she folded the letter and held it close to her chest. It was time to go home. Crossing the forbidden path. Nayla sat in her small room, staring at the letter from home, her fingers trembling as they traced her mother's desperate words. Her father was dying. The man who had once told her she carried the pride of the village on her shoulders, the man who had granted her permission to chase a dream no other girl had dared, was waiting for her return. A lump formed in her throat. She had left Carrie as a symbol of hope, but now, she was afraid of what she had become. The money she had earned, the city life she had lived, it was not the path she had intended to take. She had strayed, let herself be swept away in the current of hunger, desperation, and easy wealth. Her stomach twisted with shame. Would he still look at me with pride? Omori found her sitting there, silent, lost in thought. "You got a letter," she stated, leaning against the doorway. Nayla nodded, swallowing hard. "My father, he's dying. I have to go home." Omori studied her for a long moment. "Are you sure you want to go back?" The question made Nayla pause. The truth was, she was terrified. Terrified of facing her family, of seeing the disappointment in her mother's eyes, of knowing that the girl they had sent away was not the girl who was returning. "I have to," she said finally. Omori sighed, walking over and placing a small pouch in Nayla's hands. It was filled with money. "Take this," she said. "You'll need it for the journey." Nayla looked at the pouch, then at Omori. "I can't take this." "Yes, you can," Omori said firmly. "You might hate the choices you made here, but they kept you alive. Don't let your pride stop you from accepting help." Nayla hesitated before nodding. The money would at least get her home. And so, the next morning, she left the city behind, stepping onto the same dusty road she had once traveled with dreams in her heart. But this time, she carried something heavier. She carried the weight of her choices. The return of shame. Carrie had not changed. The village still stood, quiet and steady, untouched by the rush of city life. Smoke curled from small cooking fires, children ran barefoot in the fields, and women gathered under the old baobab tree, grinding grain and weaving baskets. But the moment Nayla stepped into the village, everything slowed. People turned. Whispers began. She could feel their eyes, scanning her fine city dress, the way she carried herself. She was no longer the girl they had sent away. A woman near the well muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "She has returned." Another whispered, "Look at her clothes, does she think she is better than us now?" Nayla kept her head high, though shame burned in her chest. She reached her family's hut and hesitated before pushing aside the curtain. Her mother was sitting beside the mat where her father lay. He was thinner than she remembered, his once strong frame now frail. His eyes, sunken and tired, turned toward her, and for a moment, they filled with something soft, relief. "Nayla," he murmured. She fell to her knees beside him, taking his hand. "Father, I am here." His fingers weakly squeezed hers. "You have grown." Tears welled in her eyes. "I have." Her mother watched silently, her face unreadable. For the next few days, Nayla stayed by her father's side, helping him, listening to his words, soaking in the last moments she had with him. But she could not ignore the whispers outside the hut, the way the villagers stared. And then, one evening, it happened. An elder woman, Auntie Loma, stood in the village square, her voice loud and cutting. "You have all seen her. The girl who went to the city and returned with fine clothes and money. But do we know how she earned it?" Murmurs spread like wildfire. Nayla felt her blood run cold. Auntie Loma's sharp eyes locked onto hers. "Tell us, Nayla. How did you live in the city? What did you do?" The village turned to her, waiting. Her mother, standing near the fire, said nothing. Nayla's hands trembled. She could lie. She could spin a tale of hard work, of struggles that had shaped her. But as she looked around, at the faces of the people who had once sent her away with hope, she knew she could not. Taking a deep breath, she spoke. "I made mistakes," she admitted, her voice steady. "I was hungry, I was desperate, and I chose a path I never should have. I lost myself in a city that did not care for me. And now, I have returned, not as the girl you once knew, but as someone who has learned the hard way." Silence. Then, Auntie Loma scoffed. "And do you think that changes what you have done?" Nayla swallowed hard. "No. But I am still Nayla of Kari. And I have come home." Her father, lying weak on his mat, smiled faintly. And then, he whispered, "A person is not their mistakes. A person is what they choose to do next." The word settled over the village like a soft wind. Nayla's mother finally stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have returned," she said. "That is enough for now." The whispers faded. That night, her father passed, his hand still in hers. Nayla wept. Not just for him, but for herself. For the girl she had once been. The path to redemption. Days turned into weeks. Nayla stayed in Kari, slowly finding her place again. The villagers were hesitant at first, but they watched her closely, watched how she helped, how she carried water, how she kneeled beside the elders and listened. She did not try to prove herself with words. She showed them through action. And slowly, they began to accept her. She spent time with the young girls of the village, telling them about the city, not just its wonders, but its dangers. "You must be strong," she told them. "You must remember who you are, no matter where you go." One day, as she sat beneath the old baobab tree, her mother came to her, placing a book in her lap. "Your father wanted you to have this," she said softly. It was one of the books Nayla had taken to the city, filled with the knowledge she had once longed for. She ran her fingers over the worn cover, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I want to teach," she whispered. Her mother nodded. "Then teach." A new beginning. Months passed, and Nayla, once the girl who had been whispered about, became something new. She gathered the village children, teaching them numbers, letters, stories of the world beyond Kari. More and more girls began to learn. More and more parents began to believe. And slowly, Kari changed. Nayla had left seeking knowledge, and though she had lost herself along the way, she had returned with something greater, the wisdom of experience. She had walked between two worlds. And now, she was forging a new one. A place where village girls did not have to choose between survival and dreams. A place where they could be both. And so, her name was no longer whispered with shame. It was spoken with pride. The curse and redemption. Nayla sat in the quiet of her father's hut, listening to the distant hum of the village. The past weeks had been heavy, losing him, facing the whispers of the people, and feeling the weight of all she had done in the city. But even as she grieved, she knew that life would not pause for her sorrow. Carrie moved forward, as it always had. She had worked to regain the village's trust, to prove that she was not just a girl who had lost her way in the city but someone who had returned with purpose. And yet, despite her efforts, something had been troubling her. A strange exhaustion clung to her, her body weakening more with each passing day. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was the stress of her return. But then, her stomach turned, and an ache settled deep within her bones. One morning, as she bent to fetch water from the well, a wave of dizziness struck her so hard that she collapsed onto the ground. Gasps filled the air. The village women rushed to her side, murmuring in concern. But it was Auntie Loma's sharp eyes that saw what the others did not. "This is no simple weakness," she muttered darkly. The elder healer was called, an old woman named Mama Decker who had spent her life tending to the sick with herbs and wisdom passed down through generations. She took one look at Nayla and frowned. "You carry a burden, child," she said gravely. Nayla's breath caught in her throat. Mama Decker placed her hands gently on Nayla's stomach, closing her eyes. A long silence stretched between them, the air thick with tension. And then, the old woman's eyes opened, filled with something unreadable. "You are with child." The words fell like thunder. The village erupted in murmurs, some gasping, others shaking their heads. Nayla felt her entire world spin. "No," she whispered, her hands trembling. But the truth was there, undeniable. She was pregnant. The curse of the village. In Kerry, a woman's purity was sacred. To bear a child outside of marriage was not just shameful, it was seen as a curse. It was said that those who strayed from tradition would be punished, their bodies growing weak, their spirits drained. And Nayla was already feeling it. Her strength was slipping. Her once bright eyes had dulled, her body growing frail while her belly swelled. The villagers looked at her with fear, with pity. "She has brought misfortune upon herself," some whispered. "It is the city's doing," others murmured. Auntie Loma's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. "The ancestors will not forgive this easily. The only way to break the curse is through the cleansing ritual." Nayla's blood ran cold. She knew of the ritual. It was an ancient practice, one that stripped a person of everything they carried, forcing them to start anew. It was painful. It was humiliating. And it was her only chance at redemption. The cleansing. The night of the ritual arrived. A fire burned in the village square, casting flickering shadows against the huts. The elders stood in a circle, their faces solemn, while the villagers watched in silence. Nayla knelt before them, her head bowed, her heart hammering. Mama Decker stepped forward, carrying a bowl filled with a mixture of herbs, ashes, and river water, a blend meant to purify both body and spirit. "You have walked a path forbidden to our daughters," the old woman said. "You have brought shame, but you have also returned. And so, the ancestors offer you a choice: accept this cleansing, or leave Kerry forever." Nayla did not hesitate. "I accept," she whispered. With that, Mama Decker dipped her hands into the bowl, gathering the thick, blackened mixture. One by one, she painted Nayla's body with it, marking her forehead, her hands, her stomach. The coldness of it seeped into her skin, a reminder of the life she had lived, the mistakes she had made. Then came the words, the prayers of the ancestors, spoken aloud by the elders, asking for forgiveness, for strength, for renewal. Nayla closed her eyes, allowing the weight of their voices to wash over her. She did not cry. She did not beg. She simply let go. And as the final words were spoken, the village erupted in song, voices rising into the night, calling her back home. The ritual was over. She was still Nayla. But now, she was Nayla reborn. The path to forgiveness. Days passed, and Nayla slowly began to recover. The villagers, once wary, started to accept her again. They did not forget, but they saw the effort she made, the way she helped, the way she listened, the way she fought to be better. She spent hours with Mama Deka, learning the ways of herbs, the power of healing. She listened to the old stories, the ones she had once dismissed as simple superstition. But most of all, she prepared for the child growing inside her. She would not run from her past. She would face it. And when the time came, she would be ready. The birth of redemption. Months passed, and Nayla's belly grew. And then, one stormy night, as the rain pounded against the rooftops, the time arrived. She screamed as the pains racked her body, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The village women surrounded her, guiding her through the agony, their hands steady, their voices calm. And then, a cry. A small, powerful cry that cut through the storm. Mama Deka lifted the child, her voice strong. A son is born. Tears spilled down Nayla's cheeks as she reached for him, her arms weak but eager. She held him close, breathing in the scent of new life, feeling the warmth of his tiny body. Ayo, she whispered, naming him after Joy. For despite everything, the pain, the shame, the struggles, he was her joy. And as the village looked upon her, upon the child she had brought into the world, something shifted. They no longer saw a girl who had lost her way. They saw a woman who had found it again. A new future. With Ayo in her arms, Nayla made a promise, not just to him, but to all the girls of Kari. She would teach them. She would show them that knowledge was not something to be feared, that tradition could evolve without being abandoned. She would ensure that no girl ever had to make the choices she had made. And so, she began a school, starting with the young ones who gathered beneath the old baobab tree, eager to learn. The village elders watched, some hesitant, some approving. But one by one, they realized the truth. Nayla had not destroyed Kari's traditions. She had given them a new future. And as the sun set over the village, her name was no longer spoken in whispers of shame. It was spoken with honor. With pride. With the knowledge that she, Nayla of Kari, had forged a path where none had existed before. And because of her, others would follow. The burden of the past and the strength of tomorrow. The days following Ayo's birth were a mixture of exhaustion and quiet joy. Nayla found herself watching over him constantly, marveling at his tiny hands, the way his small fingers curled around hers. He was a symbol of her past mistakes, but also of her second chance. Each time she looked at him, she was reminded that her story did not end in shame, but in redemption. The village had begun to change, though not all at once. Some still whispered when she passed, still saw her as the girl who had gone astray. But others, many others, had started to see her differently. She was no longer just a cautionary tale. She was proof that one could stumble and rise again. But not everyone in Kari was ready to accept that change. One afternoon, as Nayla sat outside her home grinding millet, a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Auntie Loma standing there, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You think a school will change what you've done?" the older woman asked. Nayla met her gaze steadily. "I think it will change what comes next." Auntie Loma scoffed. "And who will listen to you? You lost your way. You came back with a child and think that makes you a teacher." Nayla sighed, setting the grinding stone aside. "I lost my way, yes. But I also found my way back. And now, I want to make sure no other girl in this village feels like she has to leave just to learn. Auntie Loma studied her for a long time before shaking her head. Tradition does not change overnight, Nayla. And some wounds do not heal so easily. I know, Nayla said softly. But I will keep trying. The older woman walked away without another word, leaving Nayla to sit with her thoughts. She knew that not everyone would support her. She knew that some wounds ran too deep to be mended in mere months. But she also knew that she had to try. And so, she did. The first lessons. At first, only a few children came to listen. The younger ones, mostly, curious, eager. They sat beneath the shade of the old baobab tree, wide-eyed as Nayla taught them how to shape letters with charcoal on smooth stones, how to count beyond what their fingers could hold. Then came the older children. The ones who had seen their parents hesitate, unsure if learning was meant for them, but who came anyway. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. A girl, barely younger than Nayla herself, stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Teach me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nayla recognized her. Zoe. The daughter of one of the strictest elders in the village. The murmurs around them grew. "Does your father know you are here?" Nayla asked gently. Zoe swallowed hard, shaking her head. "He says girls do not need to learn. But I want to. I need to." Nayla took a deep breath. She knew the risk. If the elders disapproved, the entire school could be shut down before it had even begun. But she also knew what it was like to yearn for something more. And so, she nodded. "Then you will learn." And with that, something shifted. More girls began coming, some in secret, others with the quiet approval of their mothers. The younger boys, too, eager not to be left behind. Word spread. The school was no longer just an idea. It was real. A village divided. But not everyone was pleased. One evening, as Nayla finished a lesson, she saw a group of men gathered in the distance, their voices hushed but tense. The village elders. She knew what was coming before they even approached. Elder Bahati, a man with a voice like thunder, stepped forward. "Nayla," he called. She straightened, wiping her hands on her dress before facing them. "Yes, Elder." He did not waste words. "This school of yours, it must stop." The words hit her like a blow, but she did not flinch. "Why?" The elder frowned. "You are teaching girls things they do not need to know. You are filling their heads with ideas that will only lead them away from their duties." "Duties?" Nayla repeated, her voice calm. "And what of the duties to themselves? To their futures?" The murmurs behind the elder grew louder, some in agreement, others hesitant. "You are changing the way of things," Elder Bahati said. "And not all change is good." Nayla took a deep breath. She had been prepared for this moment. "I do not seek to erase our traditions," she said. "I only seek to give our people a choice." She turned to the villagers, raising her voice so they could all hear. "I left this village believing that learning was something only the city could give. But that is not true. Knowledge belongs to all of us. It is not a city thing or a village thing, it is a human thing. And if we do not grow, if we do not learn, then we are choosing to remain behind while the world moves forward." Silence fell over the crowd. Some nodded. Others looked away, their expressions unreadable. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice rang out. It was Elder Omari's brother, Nayla's uncle. "The world is changing," he said. "And perhaps we should not be afraid of it. More murmurs. More uncertainty." But Nayla saw something, hope. The elders did not stop the school that day. Nor the next. And slowly, more people began to listen. The road ahead. Months passed, and the school grew. Nayla taught the children in the mornings, helped their parents in the afternoons. The lessons expanded, not just reading and counting, but herbal medicine, farming techniques, storytelling. She found ways to tie learning into the traditions of Kari, showing that knowledge did not have to mean abandoning who they were. One evening, as she sat by the fire, rocking Ao to sleep, her mother sat beside her. "You have done something I never thought possible," she said softly. Nayla looked at her, surprised. "You approve?" Her mother smiled, brushing a hand over Ao's cheek. "I do not understand it all," she admitted. "But I see that you are not trying to change us, you are trying to help us grow. And that is something your father would have been proud of." Tears pricked Nayla's eyes, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she looked out at the village she had once feared returning to. The village that had once rejected her. The village that was slowly becoming something new. And she realized something. She had once thought that change meant leaving. But now, she knew the truth. Change begins at home. And she would never leave it behind again. A new dawn for Kari. The sun rose gently over Kari, painting the village in hues of gold and amber. The same sun that had watched Nayla leave was now witnessing her rebuild, standing tall with purpose. The whispers of shame that had once followed her were fading, replaced by murmurs of admiration and cautious curiosity. The school beneath the old baobab tree had become a place of gathering, not just for children but for their parents, who watched with reluctant acceptance as their sons and daughters learned to read, write, and count. Nayla had not just returned, she had reclaimed herself. But change was slow, and resistance still lingered like shadows at the edges of her new life. The breaking point. One afternoon, Nayla sat under the tree, guiding a group of children through a reading lesson. They laughed as they stumbled over unfamiliar words, their excitement contagious. But then, a sudden, sharp voice cut through the moment. "Nayla." She turned to see Elder Bohoti, his face like a storm. Behind him stood several other elders, including Auntie Loma, their expressions grim. The laughter died instantly. The children scattered, running to their homes. Nayla stood slowly, squaring her shoulders. "Elder Bohoti," she greeted, her voice steady. "You have gone too far," he said, his voice thick with authority. "We tolerated your school, we allowed your foolishness. But now you are teaching girls to read. You are teaching them the words of men." Nayla clenched her fist. She had known this was coming. "Elder, knowledge is not just for men," she said firmly. "It is for everyone." "It is not," he bellowed. "A girl's place is in the home, beside the fire, not beneath a tree with chalk in her hands." A crowd had gathered, villagers peering cautiously from their huts. Nayla stepped forward, lifting her chin. "Then tell me, Elder," she said, her voice clear. "If a woman's place is in the home, should she not know how to count the harvest? Should she not know how to read a message from the city? Should she not have the knowledge to help her family grow?" Elder Bohoti faltered for a fraction of a second, but Auntie Loma stepped in. "A woman's knowledge is in her hands, Nayla. Not in books." Nayla took a deep breath. "And yet, the world is changing," she said. "The cities are growing, the traders are bringing new things. Will we stand still while the world moves forward?" A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. A younger man, Elder Omari's brother, stepped forward. "Nayla is right," he said. "We cannot ignore the world beyond Kari forever. We must prepare our children." The tension in the air shifted. Elder Bohoti saw it, too. He saw the hesitation in the eyes of the villagers, saw that some of them were listening. His face twisted in frustration. "If you continue this school," he warned, "we will banish you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nayla's heart pounded, but she held her ground. If you banish me, she said, then you must banish every child who has learned here. Every parent who has allowed their daughters to listen. Every boy who has picked up a book. Will you cast out half the village, Elder? Elder Bohoti's lips pressed into a thin line. He turned sharply, his final words clipped. You will regret this. And then he was gone. The test of strength. For weeks, Nayla waited. She knew Elder Bohoti was not a man who would accept defeat easily. But she continued teaching, continued building. The school grew, and something amazing happened. Women began to join the lessons too. Mothers who had never held a book before sat beside their daughters. Young boys watched as their sisters counted faster than them, and their respect for learning deepened. Then, one evening, disaster struck. A group of men, followers of Elder Bohoti, came in the night and burned the school to the ground. Nayla arrived just in time to see the last of the flames consuming the wooden benches, the chalkboards, the books she had collected with so much effort. She fell to her knees, the heat of the embers warming her skin. The village stood in silence. A part of her wanted to give up. She had fought so hard, and yet, they had taken everything. But then, a small hand slipped into hers. She turned to see Zoe standing beside her, her young face streaked with tears. We can build it again, the girl whispered. Another hand joined hers. Then another. And another. Mothers. Fathers. Children. One by one, they stepped forward. Nayla's breath caught in her throat. They were choosing her. She rose to her feet, wiping the soot from her hands. We will rebuild, she declared. And this time, it will be stronger than before. A future forged in fire. The school rose again, not as a simple gathering place beneath a tree, but as a structure built with the hands of the people who believed in it. Men who had once doubted her laid stones for the foundation. Women wove mats for the children to sit on. Young boys carved wooden benches. Even the elders who had been hesitant before remained silent, watching as the village came together in a way it never had before. Nayla stood at the center of it all, not just as a teacher, but as a leader. Elder Bohoti never returned. But the world did not wait for him. And neither did Kerry. The legacy of Nayla. Years passed, and the school flourished. More and more children came, not just from Kerry but from neighboring villages, drawn by the whispers of a place where learning was for all. Nayla raised Ao beneath the roof of that school, teaching him the same lessons she had once longed for. And when he was old enough, she sent him to the city, not to lose himself in its darkness, but to learn and return, just as she had. She grew older, her face lined with years, her hands strong from building. But her name never faded. She became a legend, not just in Kerry, but far beyond. They told stories of the girl who had left her village and returned, not with riches, but with knowledge. They whispered about the fire that had tried to stop her. And they spoke of how she had risen, stronger than before. The girl who walked between two worlds. The woman who built a bridge. And because of her, the daughters of Kerry would never be afraid to dream again.